Hopefully that's recording now. Did anyone get recording has started? Wonderful. All right. Well, thank you guys for joining us tonight. It's a real pleasure for us to have Dr. Mark Williams with us tonight. Dr. Mark has shared with us in our previous groups and always found it to be incredibly somewhere between exciting, informative, and scary, all in one package, because when you start to hear the facts, the science behind this stuff, it can be really eye-opening. And hopefully it's also somewhat confirming with the journey that we've begun here as we try and get on top and manage this and balance this with the rest of our life. So Dr. Mark, he's a cognitive neuroscientist. He was awarded several fellowships, both here and in the USA at MIT and in Australian universities. And as he had mentioned just a moment ago, he's recently published, and it's up now, his new book, Connected Species. So hopefully Mark can share a little bit more about that. I think that's a very timely message. Dr. Mark has appeared on many TV shows, including Mirror Mirror. If you haven't seen that on 10 Play, I'd highly recommend it, with Todd Sampson. Some really good stuff. You can watch that with the kids as well as other TV shows, ABC, Sunrise, and on several radio shows. And his work now currently is around schools and businesses and helping them with the neuroscience of learning, emotions, and the impact of modern technologies on our brains. So, Dr. Mark, I look forward to hearing what you share with us tonight as you inform us and educate us on how smartphones are making us dumb.
Thank you, Chris. I'm just going to share my slides so that you don't have to look at me and you can see the slides. Hopefully I can do that. Presenter mode, screen. Is that going to work? Let's see if that works.
Yep, that's it.
That works. Awesome. Oh, there we go.
It looks like we've got. Yep, there we go.
Technology's working. Awesome. Okay, so I like to ask the question: are smartphones making us dumb? And of course, it's not the actual technology itself; it's just how we're using it. And I think that's a really sad aspect to it, because I think it's an amazing technology, and if we actually used it in a positive way, I think we would all be a lot better off. But unfortunately, the way they're set up and the way they're designed at the moment is causing a lot of problems, which, as Chris said, I've talked to Chris and the guys at Coda a few times about, and with several of his groups, but we'll talk about it tonight as well. Is this going to work? There we go. Yeah, so I'm a professor of cognitive neuroscience, as Chris said. Those are some of the fellowships that I've been awarded. They give me the funding to allow me to do a lot of the research that I've done. So I just like to mention those at the beginning. One thing that's interesting about my past is I was at MIT when the first iPhone came out. I was also at MIT at the same time Mark Zuckerberg was at Harvard University. And MIT and Harvard University, they actually overlap spatially, and so they're right next to each other across the river from Boston. And so Mark Zuckerberg was at Harvard when I was at MIT, and Mark Zuckerberg released Facebook just to students at MIT and at Harvard because, of course, he was after getting dates. The precursor, of course, to Facebook was Hot or Not, which is why Facebook is called Facebook, because Hot or Not was actually, they stole all of the photos from the administration building at MIT and at Harvard, and they put up the female students' faces. They'd be put up two at a time, and people would grade which one was hot, decide which one was hot and which one was not hot. And that's actually where they got the idea for the name Facebook for Facebook. So that's where it comes from, and that's the morals and ethics of the individuals that are running these programs now. And I think we really need to know where it's all come from and why it's ended up where it is, because I think that morals and ethics of these people aren't what we should be teaching our kids. But that was an interesting time. I was also, as I said there, when the first iPhone came out, which was a really interesting time to watch the evolution of the iPhone. So the rise of smartphones. This was actually before COVID. I'm not sure what the numbers are like now, but there was back in 2019, I think it was 18, 19, 3.3 billion smartphones operating. The App Store's revenue was $92 billion in 2018. 72% of people say they're rarely more than 5 feet away from their handset at any time. 66% of smartphone users say they're addicted to their phones. I saw a recent stat, I don't know how reliable it is, but I saw a recent stat showing that 10% of people will actually answer their phone or will check texts on their phone while they're having sex, which I just find actually deplorable that people are at that point where they can't even spend a bit of intimate time with their partner without checking their phone. Now, you've got to remember that App Store, the apps on the App Store, vast majority of them are free. So that $92 billion that they're actually making, vast majority of that is actually through advertisement. And this is one of the big problems, is that advertising is the number one way that apps make their money. And so therefore, the only way they make money is if people's eyes are on the screens. And that's what's causing most of the issues. If we were paying for the apps, then they wouldn't have that constant need for you to actually be looking at the phones, and then we wouldn't have a lot of the issues that we currently have. But we've also got, of course, people are dying because they can't look away from these apps. So these signs are from a couple of places in Asia, but even I know here in Sydney, they're installing the lights, traffic lights in the ground in the city, because people don't look up anymore at the traffic lights, and they're actually getting hit by cars and trams because they're not looking up. So they're putting the traffic lights in the ground so that people will actually notice them, which, you know, we're actually killing ourselves just to look at the next Instagram feed or the next TikTok feed, which is just crazy as far as I'm concerned. And this is a really scary experiment. This is the first time in history that we've actually taken a technology and it's become so widely used so quickly. If you think back to some of the other technologies that have been that have occurred, that have really, you know, caused big revolutionary changes in our society, it's been a slow burn. So, you know, cars, when they first, combustion engine and cars when they first came out, it took a long time before they were everybody was using them. They were only really available to the very, very wealthy for the first 20, 30 years. And so we had time to adjust and create laws and regulations around how cars were driven and, you know, licensing requirements and so on. But we haven't had any of that with this new technology. It's gone from nothing to actually, you know, in everybody's hands virtually overnight. And we now know 25% of kids in the UK have a smartphone by the age of 6. Teens in the US spend average of 9 hours daily on screens. And we're really being wired up to be dependent on these smartphones and unwired for the real world, which is not good for us as a species. And I'll explain why in a minute. But of course, a lot of people argue that this is all making our lives better, right? Now that we've got these smartphones, we've got these computers, which, you know, 30 years ago, to have a computer that can do what the smartphone can do in our pockets was really unbelievable. We would have never imagined that this was actually going to happen. And of course, now we can be contacted by our boss 24 hours a day. We can check emails 24 hours a day. We can do video calls 24 hours a day. We can check out what an influencer's doing on the other side of the world. We can watch videos. We can do all of these things all the time. But unfortunately, it's causing a huge problem. Some of the problems with the smartphone, we've had an increase in the last 10 years in stress in society, anxiety issues, depression, addiction, suicide. And we've had a decrease in socializing, in physical activity, in sleep, in learning, in memory, in curiosity, and in tolerance. And this was all occurring before COVID actually happened. A lot of people are now blaming COVID, but this was all happening well before COVID. And I've spoke to Chris about this before COVID happened. So this is something that's been happening for a while and is due to the smartphone. And we have some really good evidence that it's now due to the smartphone. 5-6 years ago, most of the studies were correlational, but now we have a lot of causative studies that have actually shown the impact of the smartphone on people's stress and anxiety and mental health and addiction and so on. And as I said, this is the first time in history this has happened. So let me take you back a step. So one of the things that we need to realize about our brains is that our brains aren't capable of actually processing all the information that we're receiving. And so what actually happens is we have a working memory. That's a part of our brain which we think of as our consciousness, which is controlled by our attention. And our working memory is only capable of processing, well, it used to only be capable of processing 7 things at a time. And so we can only hold in our working memory 7 things at any moment in time. And so when hopefully you're listening to me at the moment, and that takes all of those slots to actually listen and understand what somebody's saying. And so hopefully you're not actually attending to anything else, but just actually attending to me. And so you can hear what I'm saying, understand what I'm saying. And information has to be held in that working memory long enough so that it can be transferred to a temporary store, so then it can be transferred to your long-term memory when you're actually sleeping, so you can actually remember that information. If our attention gets disrupted by something, then our working memory gets shifted to that new thing, and we actually lose the last 90 seconds of our time. So every time your smartphone beeps or buzzes or does anything like that, or every time you get an email on your laptop or on your computer, every time Teams notifies you that there's something going on, every time anything like that actually happens, you lose the last 90 seconds of your time. And you've probably all noticed that, you're watching TV and then somebody asks you a question. You don't go back to whatever you're watching and remember where you're actually up to. You forget the last 90 seconds of what you were doing. You usually have to ask someone else, hey, what just happened? Or you have to rewind the thing so that you can actually remember what actually just happened or see what just happened. And that's what's happening to us all day. And that's why we're all busier today than we've ever been before. But we're actually less productive today than we've ever been before. So we all feel more busy, but we're actually getting less shit done every day because we're losing 90 seconds every time we're disrupted, every time our attention is shifted by our smartphones and by our notifications and by all those apps on our computers that are supposedly making us more productive. And they're not. All the evidence shows that people are less productive today than they were 10 years ago. So what is it actually attracts our attention? So there's 4 main things that attract attention that we know actually capture our attention, and they are faces. I was the first to discover that faces actually capture our attention, and they can be human faces or they can be animal faces, because all mammals are actually attracted to faces. And that attracts our attention, and we can't actually control that, and it happens automatically. The second thing is color. Reds, oranges, and yellows especially attract our attention and capture our attention, and that's why all these billboards in Times Square use these bright colors, because they attract our attention. The third thing is movement. Movement attracts our attention because, of course, we want to know when something's flying towards our head from an evolutionary point of view. It's good to actually duck and not get hit by something. And so we've evolved this mechanism where we automatically attend to things that are actually moving in our vision, especially in our peripheral vision. And then the last thing is sound will attract our attention because we want to know when something's sneaking up behind us, or hiding in the bushes or whatever. And so sound also attracts our attention. And these billboards have all those things to capture people as they're actually walking around, because these billboards cost an absolute fortune. And I probably don't need to mention that these things do exactly the same, right? They've actually got lots of colors to actually constantly attract our attention. These things are the Google sign and the Instagram sign. They're actually perceived by our brains, and our brains process them as though they're faces now. So we are actually automatically attracted to these signs because we are so addicted to these phones and addicted to these very clever technology company symbols. Also, of course, they make sounds. They ding or buzz. And the ding, of course, as soon as you turn down the ding, as soon as you turn down the noise on the phone, it will then start buzzing instead. And again, that attracts our attention and grabs our attention. And of course, every time, as I said, every time that happens, you're losing the last 90 seconds of what you were doing. So you're losing that amount of time every time this happens each day. So how bad is this attentional effect? Well, if you turn off your phone and put your phone in the glove box, so you turn off your phone and you put it in the glove box, 10% of your attention is still on your phone. They say that 10% of your attention is equivalent to having one standard drink. So if you have your phone turned off and in your glove box, it's equivalent to driving after having one standard drink. If your phone is beside you, it's worse. And if your phone buzzes or dings or does any of those things, then 100% of your attention goes to your phone. If you don't answer it, 100% of your attention goes to your phone. So for the next 90 seconds, you are not aware of what's happening in front of you because all of your attention is on your phone. All of your working memory is on your phone if you don't actually answer it. And of course, if you do answer it or if you do look down at it, then it's even far, far worse. This is even worse when it comes to students because students, kids, teenagers don't have normal functioning prefrontal cortices, so they don't have as much control over their attentional network. This is a study done in schools with teenagers where they got the teenagers to turn off their phones and then they either put their phones upside down on their desk but turned off, like you, or in a pocket or in their bag or in another room. If it was on their desk or in their pocket or bag, there's a significant impact on their working memory capacity. As we talked about before, your working memory capacity is essential for you to actually understand concepts, understand ideas, to actually be attending to the person that you're actually listening to, i.e. a teacher, or what you're reading or what you're listening to on, whatever it happens to be. And you have to hold information in your working memory long enough for it to be transferred to that temporary store for it then to be transferred to your long-term memory. If you've got a phone turned off and in your pocket or your bag or your desk, then you have a significant impact on your working memory capacity. You also have a significant impact on your intelligence level. Your intelligence and your kid's intelligence is negatively affected, significantly negatively affected by having a phone close to them if it's turned off. If it's turned on, the impact is far, far worse. In working memory, we can't really study that from the point of view because every time that phone rings or dings or does anything like that, working memory capacity goes to zero. So this effect would be down at zero rather than 28 every time it actually does anything like that because all their attention is shift and they've lost the last 90 seconds of what they were doing. We also now know that it's affecting their brains. So this is a study in preschool-aged children who learned how to read either on a screen or learn how to read on paper. And they showed that you don't need to know the details of this, but these areas that they're showing up here are what we call the white matter tracts. These are things like the corpus callosum you may have heard of. These are the areas that connect one area of the brain to another area of the brain. They're sort of like the highways in a city that connect all the different suburbs together and let the traffic flow. These areas are really, really important for letting information flow across the brain and to different areas. These areas abnormally developing in kids who have screens at an early age. They've actually got abnormal development of their brain. This was the first study to do this. There's been several follow-up studies to this from different groups around the world, and NIH in the US, National Institute for Health, is doing a huge multi-billion-dollar study on this now because they're really concerned about what this actually means for the next generation because of the fact that these areas are so crucial for normal cognitive functioning. And then we've also got problem with neuroplasticity. We now know that your brain constantly changes, and all our brains are constantly changing based on what we're doing and what we're not doing. So there was a great study done in 2000 where they looked at London taxi drivers, and London taxi drivers, to get a taxi driver's license, you got to do a really, really difficult test where you have to know all the streets of London without actually using a map. And so they actually spend 18 months, 2 years actually learning all of the streets and how to get around London without a map, and then they try to pass this test, and they usually fail it a few times before they pass it. But they looked at the area of their brain, this parahippocampal place area, which is the area of the brain involved in actually getting around the world, and has all our maps basically set out in there for us. And they found that London taxi drivers have much bigger parahippocampal gyri than your average individual, because they have to know all of these routes without actually using a map, which is a really interesting study and showed that our brains are constantly changing. And if we're doing good things, then it actually changes in a good way. If we're doing bad things, then it changes in a negative way. But the other really interesting thing about this study is they also showed that our parahippocampal place area and where we've been is actually linked to what we've done when we've got there. So our episodic memory is in our hippocampus, which is right next to our parahippocampal gyrus. And when we go somewhere, we lay down information in our parahippocampal gyrus about how we got there, and then we link that to what we actually do when we get there. If you use a Wayfinder app, if you use Google Maps or anything like that to actually get somewhere, then you don't lay down any map in your parahippocampal gyrus. And if you have no map in your parahippocampal gyrus as to how you got there, then you don't actually lay down your episodic memory, what you do there as well. So if you use a Wayfinder app to go into the city to watch a movie, you won't remember as much about that movie as compared to if you don't use a Wayfinder app to actually get into the city. Why is this a problem? Well, they've actually shown that in college students in the US, they've given half the group of college students a map to get around the college, the university. They've given the other half a Wayfinder app to get around the university, and then they've tested how they're going after 6 months of either using a Wayfinder app or using a real map to get around the university. Not surprisingly, they don't know the kids who have been given the app don't know their way around the college as well as the kids who have done it with a real map. But what's really concerning is they don't have as many friends at the university. They haven't made as many good relationships at the university. They don't have as much connection to the university, but they are also getting lower marks in all of their courses at the university because they're using these Wayfinder apps to get to their lectures, and then they're not remembering what they're actually learning at the lectures as well because of the fact that they haven't laid down the memory traces to actually get there, to then lay down the memory traces of what they do there onto those memory traces. So they end up getting lower SATs at the university if they use a Wayfinder app. And so we've really got to realize that we've got to use our brain, or else we don't have the ability to use it, because we need to be constantly exercising. And these smartphones are really limiting our experience and our learning. You know, we don't have to navigate or remember or calculate or consider or imagine or interact with the world and others anymore. And unfortunately, we are losing these abilities. There's been a significant increase in dementia in society since we've had the phones. There's been a significant increase in early onset dementia and Alzheimer's disease since we've had these these smartphones in society. The earlier a child is given or has access to a smartphone, the more likely they are to be diagnosed with ADHD or with autism. And there's a new term that hasn't actually been ratified yet, but they're talking about, which is actual digital ADHD rather than genetic ADHD. And we believe that a large percentage of the kids that have been diagnosed with ADHD have digital ADHD because of being put on or given access to devices much earlier, rather than a genetic ADHD, which is the old ADHD, which has been around for quite, for probably forever. Now, one of the arguments I get from a lot of people, especially teachers, is that we can't stop this because now students have access to the world. And that's much better than it was in the old days, because now they can get access to anything they want. But what we actually know is that we actually have access to less information today than we did 20 years ago. And the reason we have access to less information today than we did 20 years ago is because we don't actually have access to everything that's on the internet. We have access to the information that we are fed through Google and through the other apps that we use. And they have algorithms which run, and those algorithms determine what information it is going to feed us based on our prior searches, based on our connections on social media and so on, and based on what we've also put up on the internet and so on. And so that information is biased. So if I searched for something and you search for exactly the same thing, my list of things that I would get to choose from would be different from your list of things that you would get to choose from. And that is biasing the information that we actually receive. So we don't have access to everything. We only have access to the information that these apps actually want to feed us so that we will stay on the internet. We've also got a huge problem with the dopamine and addiction. So when something positive happens, our brain releases dopamine and we feel pleasure, and it's our brain's mechanism to get to us to repeat positive things like drinking and eating and sex and so on. And we remember the thing that happened just before the release of dopamine. And that's what actually causes addiction, because the dopamine gives us a positive feeling. But in the real world, we actually receive more than dopamine. In the real world, when we're actually, for example, connected to someone and we're actually chatting with someone, we also receive oxytocin and serotonin and other endorphins. But when we're online, all we receive is dopamine, which means it's an abnormal response to a positive thing. And dopamine fades really quickly, whereas those other things actually remain in our system for longer so that we get more sustained response to it. So we're getting these hits of dopamine, but we're not getting those other important neurotransmitters. The other problem is that variable reinforcement schedules have been used for years in gambling, and psychologists have been studying this for probably 100, 150 years. Variable reinforcement schedules is the whole idea that you hold off on giving someone a reward for long enough that they really want that reward, and then you actually hit them with that reward, and you get the ultimate amount of dopamine released in that person's brain, and it gets people addicted much more quickly to whatever it is that you're trying to get them addicted to. And smartphone notifications are actually using this variable reinforcement schedules to reward and prolong the use, which increases dopamine and likelihood of return. And this is exactly the same method as casinos. Facebook has admitted that they actually hold off on your likes. So they don't give you the likes when someone actually sends a like to you, when they press the button for like. They hold off on the likes, and they then give the likes at a time which is based on variable reinforcement schedules in order to increase the amount of dopamine that you receive. And all of the other apps do exactly the same thing. So they're actually using the same methods as used by casinos and gambling machines to increase the likelihood that you'll get the most amount of dopamine, and therefore more likely to actually get addicted to the device, to the app that they're trying to get you addicted to. And it's been shown that simply by batching smartphone notifications or turning off your smartphone or use all your smartphone notifications, and just checking your smartphone when you want to check your phone rather than when they've actually decided they're going to send you those notifications to increase the amount of dopamine. If you do that, you actually improve your well-being. You improve both stress and anxiety and depressive symptoms within 2 weeks. So by turning off all your notifications or using it in some sort of app to actually batch your notifications where you only receive all your notifications 2 or 3 times a day, you actually improve your well-being, your mental well-being within 2 to 3 weeks. There's also a thing called phantom buzz syndrome now. which is a buzz that teenagers get on their legs when their phones actually haven't buzzed. So they call it phantom buzz because it's when they're not actually buzzing. A good colleague of mine at Arizona State studies this quite extensively, and he takes his students out into the Arizona desert where they have no access to phone coverage. And he finds that even after 5 days, 25% of the students still get these phantom buzzes on their phones, even though their phones have not buzzed for 5 days, and they know that it can't buzz, right? Because there's no coverage there. It was interesting. I was at a couple of years ago, I was at a big conference for principals, and one of the principals, when I was presenting this stuff, came up to me afterwards, and he said that when he takes off his smartwatch, he gets phantom buzzes at night, and it actually keeps him awake. He has trouble sleeping because he gets phantom buzzes on his wrist, because of the smartwatch on his wrist always buzzing with emails and so on. And we've also got to be aware that we are actually wiring ourselves up to be unsocial. So we are a social species. And as I said, Chris mentioned, I've just recently published a book called The Connected Species, because we are the connected species. We got to where we are today because of the fact that we are social, because of the fact that we actually collaborate with each other. We're not the smartest, sorry, we're not the fastest species on this planet Earth. We're not the strongest species on this planet Earth. And we actually don't have the largest brain of all the species on this planet Earth. We got to be in the alpha because of the fact we're social, because we're connected and we actually collaborate with each other. But that takes a lot of work, and we have a large brain that enables us to do that. We evolved a large brain so that we could collaborate and we could be social with lots and lots and lots of people within groups and between groups as well, which is pretty amazing. But we're losing that ability now because of these smartphones. So we are social animals and we survive through social interactions, but social abilities need to be learned through trial and error, and it's often difficult and confusing, especially for teenagers. And devices are designed for solo activity. They're not designed for you to actually interact with other people. And collaborating on a device, when they try to use these so-called collaboration apps, they actually don't work because there's less eye contact. And to actually collaborate with someone, to actually really work with someone, you need eye contact. You need to be reading the other person's emotions, their intentions, their body language, the prosody of their voice, all of these things. And you can't do that on a device because you're looking at the device, not at the other person. And we now know that 12-month-old children whose carers use smartphones have poorer facial expression ability than those who don't use smartphones. And the reason for that is we, as toddlers, we actually learn what the different facial expressions are by looking at our carer. So a toddler will do something, will fall over, and then they'll automatically look up at their carer. And if the carer is watching them, then the carer will then have a sad face, and the toddler learns that that sad face means that I've hurt myself. And so therefore they understand that sad faces are for when I'm sad, or when they do something good, they do something happy, they do something really cute or whatever, they look at their carer to get a response. As you know, you guys have all had kids and you would know this. They look at their carer to get a response, and the carer smiles, and they learn that smile goes with doing something fun, doing something good. And so therefore they understand that's the case. There is now a problem in the US where we have a lot of toddlers who have the still face effect. This used to happen only in kids who were severely maltreated. But this is happening in a large percentage of kids now in the US, where they don't use their faces, they don't use facial expressions, and they have to be taught before they go to preschool how to use facial expressions because their carers on the smartphones, and they're not teaching them just by that normal interaction what the different facial expressions actually mean. We also know the grade 6 kids, and these studies, there's a couple of these studies now have been done here in Australia. So this is normal grade 6 kids in Australia who go away on a camp for just 5 days, have significantly improved ability to recognize facial expressions, improved empathy, and improved emotional intelligence after only 5 days, which again tells us that a normal grade 6 child has abnormal ability to recognize facial expressions, abnormal empathy, and abnormal emotional intelligence because of the amount of time they're spending on devices. And this isn't just smartphones. One of the big issues in Australia actually is that we have more device time in schools than any other country in the world. We've adopted devices such as laptops and tablets and computers in schools more than any other country in the world, and kids are spending more time on these devices every day, which means that their learning's actually really been affected, but also their ability to collaborate and their ability to understand how to communicate with each other. And this is an interesting study that just recently came out. This was with over 500,000 teenagers, adolescents, showing in this red line here is school loneliness, and as you can see, school loneliness over the last since 2012 has actually gone through the roof. So kids are actually lonely at school, where of course there's kids everywhere, right? Why are they lonely? They're lonely because they're on the smartphones and they're on the devices, and this correlates very, very closely with GDP, with internet use, and with smartphone access. And we also know cyberbullying, of course, is high. But what's really interesting, if you ban the smartphones from the schools, which they're now doing in Queensland, which is awesome, if you ban the smartphones from school, cyberbullying goes down significantly, and they've shown this in Spain, where they've actually done amazing studies over there. You get a decrease in cyberbullying, but you also get a decrease in normal bullying. So it's not only cyberbullying, which is actually increased by having smartphones in schools. It's also just normal bullying is increased by having smartphones at school and kids actually using smartphones. And we can talk about that more and why that is later. We're also wiring ourselves up to be depressed. This was also with well over, I think it was close to 1 million adolescents. And again, you can see from about 2012 that you get a significant increase in depression occurring because, again, correspond with the rise of smartphones. And also, so this original study was quite controversial because, of course, it was just on a huge population. And was this actually due to smartphones or due to something else was going on? Since then, there has been dozens and dozens and dozens of papers actually investigating this from a whole heap of different angles with different groups in different countries, showing the association between smartphone use, and depression and anxiety. So this is not something that was a one-off study. This has been shown, and I could give you a couple of hundred papers now that have come out in the last 5 years, showing that there is a real significant link between smartphone use and depression and anxiety. And there's also a link with suicide. So this was from that previous study that I mentioned, and it's shown that you get an increase in at least one suicidal risk factor after about 3 hours a day on a device. Now, if you consider that most teenagers are on devices upward of 9 hours a day, this is really, really concerning and something we really need to start thinking about. And especially when this is just being on a screen. This isn't specific to being on social media or gaming or anything like that. It's just being on a screen. And when you consider that in most schools, most teenagers are on a screen just in school time around 4 hours a day, which is already increasing the risk factor. And then they're expected to do their homework on a screen. And then they're also on their smartphones when they're going to school and coming back from school, and all the other times. It's something we really need to start thinking about. So let's be honest, multinational tech companies are about making money. The board of directors and shareholders want profits. Technology is designed to be attractive so it sells, and the more attractive, the more sales. If you feel like you can't do without it, then even better for them. And they're not in the business of making your life better or educating your kids. And one thing I present a lot to teenagers at schools and spend a lot of time presenting to teenagers in schools. And one thing I always talk about is the fact that they're being manipulated, which a lot of teenagers don't like it when you actually explain the algorithms that they're actually using to actually manipulate them into actually spending lots of time on these devices. But the other thing is, why are we spending so much of our lives and so much of our time making huge amounts of profits for these tech people over in the US so that they can build rockets and fly into space and do all the rest of it that they want to do? We're creating billionaires through our time. They make money because of the amount of time we spend on these devices, and it's not benefiting us. And if I asked any of you, come and work for me for 3 hours a day, and I'm not going to pay you, I'm going to make lots of money out of it though, you'd think I was nuts. But we're all doing that. We're all spending long periods of time on these devices doing stuff which is actually harming our brains and harming our mental health. And all it's doing is making these companies a lot of money. So the results of this experiment are really damning. We've got increased stress, anxiety, depression, addiction, and suicide in our society at all ages, not just with teenagers. We've got decreased sleep, social skills, emotional intelligence, physical and intellectual ability. And I haven't even talked about the physical aspects of this, but we do know that that kids today, their bone density is about 50% where it was 15 years ago because of the fact they're not doing exercise. So we need to rethink this. And one of the things you can do, which I find really useful, and especially with teenagers, is putting a reminder on the lock screen. So making a little meme or making something on your lock screen that just attracts your attention and makes you think before you unlock the thing. Because a lot of this is habitual. The thing dings and you just open the lock screen and you look at whatever it happens to be, and then you get caught up in looking at more and more and more of it. It's these habits that are actually formed that then cause it. And to stop that, we need to stop and think before we do it. And so having something on your lock screen or on your teenagers or your kids' lock screens that actually says, this isn't good for you, or don't be an idiot, or whatever you want to put on. I've got rude words on mine to remind me. It just gives us that pause before we actually do it, so that we don't just simply do it habitually when we're actually, waiting for the train, or we're waiting at the, for the lift or whatever it happens to be. A second thing is to set up a monitoring app on all of your devices. I have teenage kids. My daughter has a smartphone because she travels by bus to her school, which is a fair way away, and she also does dancing after school, and she has a job as a waitress, so she sometimes has to come home late at night, and so she has it for safety reasons. But we all have monitoring app on all our devices, and then every Sunday we go through the monitoring information to look at what we're all been doing, and we have a bit of a competition going as to who can use the devices and use the different apps and so on the least. And my daughter loves nothing more than beating me when it comes to my usage on those things, because of course I'm probably worse, or well, I often am. Most weeks I am worse than her. But then we can have a discussion around why I'm doing those things and why it's important for my work and all the rest of it. And also I can be honest with myself and go, well, yeah, actually I didn't need to be spending that, half an hour on that day. I was sitting in a cafe and I could have just enjoyed the quiet and thought. So I think it's a really good idea to set up the monitoring app, but also to be discussing it with all your loved ones, everyone in the family each week, so that you can all see what everyone else is doing, and you can all hopefully start competing to beat each other and be better at not being on your devices. The third thing is turn off all notifications. The notifications are what But one of the ways they get us addicted, and one of the ways that they keep us addicted through that habitual behaviour of just the thing dings and you just pick it up and open it and then you stay on it. And we don't need these tech gurus screaming at us constantly, attracting our attention and taking away that 90 seconds every time that happens, even though we don't actually do anything. Even though you go, well, I don't even, I don't look at my phone when I'm doing that. But each time it dings, regardless of whether you look at it or not, you lose 90 seconds of your time, 90 seconds of your day, and you add up how many 90 seconds you lose. It's actually a lot of time, I think you'll find, during the day that you're losing, which is why you're so damn busy. The fourth one is restrict access. Pick times that all of you are off the phones. All of us in my family have it automatically locked from 9 p.m. at night to 7 o'clock in the morning. That happens every day, and none of us have access to it except if it rings. So if there's an emergency and it rings, then it rings. But we all have it set up so that between 9 p.m. and all phones, you can set them up like this, 9 p.m. and 7 a.m. we can't look at emails, we can't get any notifications, we can't do any of those things. So it's restricted. And then we also try and have at least a morning or an afternoon each weekend where we don't have our devices, where we can actually spend time with each other, which I think is really important. There's also a thing called Pomodoro technique, which is awesome for both adults and teenagers. Pomodoro comes from the idea of a tomato timer, because the original studies were done in Italy where they have these tomato timers. And what you do is you focus on one thing and one thing only for 25 minutes. So you set it up for 25 minutes and you have the timer there so you can see it, and then you turn off everything else and you just focus on one project or one thing or whatever it happens to be. If it's teenagers studying for their HSC or whatever, it's just the one thing course that they're studying for in this 25 minutes. When the timer goes off after 25 minutes, you get up and you move for 5 minutes, which resets your brain and resets your whole attentional system. So you get up and you either, depending on how healthy you are, you do sit-ups, or you can do squats, or you can do star jumps, or you can just walk around in a circle, or whatever it happens to be. Then after 25 minutes, you sit down. 5 minutes of movement, you sit down and you start again. And you find that you actually get back into the flow much quicker when you do it that way. And you do that 4 times, which is 2 hours of really intense, good, productive work. And then you have a longer break of 25 minutes. It's been shown to be the best way to be productive. It is the most productive way you can actually spend your day. You get so much more done if you do it that way. Teenagers or anybody who's trying to study, it is the best way. It's been shown to be the best way to study as well. But again, you've got to have no other distractions, and you've got to be focusing on one thing for each of those 25-minute segments. And it's been shown that 25 minutes is the optimal to get into flow and then to actually be productive. And then you've got to have that break at the 5-minute mark, which is the best way to do it. So that's just a great technique for everybody. I actually use this with teachers who have students who have ADHD and autism, and we've had some amazing results with this, where you start this timer at a really short duration, like 1 minute or 2 minutes, and then you slowly build it up so they actually exercise their attentional network, and so they actually get better. And I've had students who were truants and wouldn't stay at school, and you couldn't get them to actually sit in class for any more than a couple of minutes, who now love school and actually spend classes concentrating better than a lot of the so-called normal kids in the classroom. So this can also be used if you have kids who have attentional issues, to slowly build up their attentional network, because again, it's use it or lose it. And so if they're actually exercising, it will get stronger and it will get better, and they will be able to attend for longer. So it's a great way. And you can look this up on the internet. There are lots of web pages all about the Pomodoro technique. So that's it for me. As I said, there's a new book, The Connected Species, which is coming out. And that's my email and my website if you want to check out some of the stuff, read some more stuff and all the rest of it, or just sign up to my newsletter. And you can get my book at all the bookshops online or in person. Just ask for The Connected Species. And it goes through all of this stuff that I've been talking about today in a couple of chapters, and then there's chapters on a whole bunch of other stuff related to us being connected and how important it is for our future and for our teenagers and our kids' futures, and how we can do it all a lot better than we currently are. And if Chris wants, I've actually just recently been given I'll stop presenting. I've just been recently given a 15% discount through the distributor. So I can send that flyer to you if you like, and you can send that to everyone so they can get a discount. Everyone loves a discount, right? I'll send that to you.
Definitely. Thank you so much, Dr. Mark. And are you open to some questions now?
I sure am. Sorry, I went a little bit over. I was hoping to give you more time.
Not at all. Look, I'm going to open the first one. I've got a few here and I don't want to take up all the time. So I'm just going to hit one right away and see how we go. Mind-blowing as always. There's so much there. It's incredible. I just wanted to, I think it kind of lines up a little bit with your book. And I know the US Surgeon General recently brought out a paper on loneliness. In Australia, we've just identified the issue with loneliness. Australia, they say 1/3 of the population have identified as lonely. I wonder what you see as the relationship between technology and this pandemic of loneliness that we're now experiencing.
Yeah, I think they go hand in hand. My book does have several chapters on loneliness and why we are also lonely these days, why so many people are lonely these days, and how bad loneliness actually is for us. I mean, I think it's ironic. I work with a lot of teachers, and I think it's crazy when I'm sure you and I, Chris, were younger, and our parents would send us to our bedrooms. It was like the worst thing they could possibly do to us. It was like the worst punishment was being sent to your bedroom. Now parents have trouble getting their kids out of their bedrooms, and they're all worried about their kids because they spend all this time in their bedrooms. I mean, that's insane. The kids want to actually spend time in their bedrooms. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that we don't understand that connecting online is nothing like connecting face to face. So when we actually spend time face to face, the first thing we do when we actually meet up with someone face to face, well, we should do when we meet up with someone face to face, is we touch each other. And all societies, we have some way of appropriately touching each other. So in Stoic societies like ours, we'll shake hands. And then, of course, in Europe, they kiss each other. But even the Inuits will rub each other's noses because it's the only part of their body that's actually showing. And we as mammals have C fibers on our skin, and those C fibers are only there for touch, and they only activate for touch. And when they activate, they release oxytocin. And oxytocin is a neurotransmitter in our brain that makes us more willing to trust the person that just touched us, and it makes us more open to actually being connected to the person, and it makes us more connected to the person. So we actually feel as though this is someone we can actually trust and we can spend time with. And so we miss out on that when we're online. We also miss out on serotonin, because serotonin is released in relation to body language. And when we're online, you can only see from my shoulders up, and so you don't actually know how I'm feeling right now. If you're actually face to face, we have a mirror neuron system which actually activates and makes us do the same movements as a person who's opposite us. And as a result of that, if I was hunched over, you would also hunch over, which would make you realize that I'm actually feeling a little bit depressed. But it would also make me realize that you understand that I'm feeling a little bit depressed, and you're relating to me in that way. And so we release serotonin and other endorphins related to that really important interaction that we're actually having. So we feel connected, more connected to the person when we're actually face to face. We've also got a problem with eye gaze. So when we're actually online like this, you guys are all looking at me, which if we're actually all face to face, if we were sitting in a circle or whatever together or chatting, that wouldn't happen. So that's actually really awkward. And what my brain is actually telling me is they're all being aggressive towards me, because that's what our brain thinks is actually happening. But we're not actually being aggressive. So you get neurotransmitters saying these people actually don't like me, whereas they probably, hopefully, do like me. And that's just happening because of the way it's all set up, which isn't the way we have evolved to have it set up. And then there's a whole bunch of other things that go on when we're face to face. And we now know that if you meet up with someone face to face that you trust on a regular basis, you can increase your lifespan by 10 to 15 years. You decrease the likelihood of having Alzheimer's disease and other neurodegenerative diseases when you're older, and you decrease the likelihood of having mental health problems. The best cure for mental health issues is actually meeting up with someone face to face regularly who you trust is actually better than any drug we currently have on the market for mental health. Yet we're doing that far less today than we. I mean, I talk to people and they're just like, how often do you actually, sit down with someone and actually chat to them without a device there? And most people will never, like, they don't do that. That doesn't happen, and most people don't do that regularly. And so we need to get back to that. We need to actually get back to actually spending time with people face to face and actually interacting with them, because it's so important for our mental health. And it's actually better for your brain than anything else you can do as well, because our brains have evolved to interact, because that's what we do, right? That's what we've evolved to do. And so more of your brain is actually active when you're interacting with someone. So if you want to have a healthy brain, if you want your kids to have a healthy brain, you've got to get them to sit down face to face and spend time talking to people, and that'll be better for their brain than any schoolwork they can do. It's better than doing Sudoku, it's better than doing all of those things. Plus, it's really good for your cardiovascular system too. So if you have heart problems, you spend more time with people and you actually improve your heart problems. So, there's so many benefits. And we are all lonely, and we're spending less time with people, and so we're not getting those benefits, and so we're all dying earlier. We're all more stressed, and we don't get all those really important things happening. Sorry, I went on a bit of a rant. I'm so passionate about it, spending more time with each other.
I love it, and it kind of speaks so much to that loneliness and the disconnection that's going on. And when you're talking about the mirror neurons and stuff, I see that empathy and stuff is developed as a result of that. Without it, we don't learn empathy.
Yeah.
Which is why we have such division and such, there's the aggression and everything else.
Yeah.
We're just not seeing each other.
It links to all of those things, there's, as I said, there's a whole section in my book all about that particular thing and all of the things that it leads on to that you're talking about, Chris, which are, causing all sorts of problems in our society today, and a lot of problems for kids, which is really, really sad.
So good. I got more, but I'm not going to ask. I'm going to ask someone else. Anyone else? I'm sure there's questions.
Just maybe got a couple of quick ones here, and I'll be as quick as I can. First of all, there was reported in the media the last few days that the NAPLAN scores nationwide are continuing to fall and get worse results for Australian students.
Yeah.
This is possibly associated with the BYOD, bring your own device, coming to school. When do you think they're going to look at whether or not BYOD has been a success or not, and maybe take some action? And the second little comment I have here is another type of anxiety, which I've noticed around colleagues I work with, is the little box up in the corner of your phone that tells you how much battery level you've got. And I see people stressing out when it's down in the 15% bar, and it's like they're almost worried more about their phone's life than what there is. And ironically, we bought new iPhones the other day, and it's got 28 hours battery life on it. And it's like, that makes me feel more comfortable, and I don't think I'm addicted to it.
Yeah. So your first question, I don't know. I've been working with schools now for 5 or 6 years. It's great that they've decided to ban the phones, but they don't seem to be shifting on the actual devices in schools. I think there's a lot of money involved. I think that education departments see it as a way of having less teachers, but it doesn't work. The PISA, who do all the stuff around, the outcomes across whatever it is, 48 different countries. The head of that organisation 3 years ago said that devices in schools are doing more harm than good. We've had recently the OECD have come out with a huge report saying again that devices are doing more harm than good. If you look at the top 10 countries in the world for outcomes, for educational outcomes, they have very little, if any, devices in their schools. Singapore is a great example. Singapore used to be number one. they started bringing in devices, and they saw themselves drop to number 12 across the world. And so they got rid of all the devices virtually overnight, and they went back to number 1 within about 2 years. They've now dropped to number 2, but they're still up there. Yeah, Australia needs to look at it, because we're continually sliding. We're now a year and a half. Year 12 students are now a year and a half behind where they were 10 years ago. So a year 12 student, when he finishes today, is equivalent to halfway through year 10 10 years ago, which is deplorable. And university, I worked at the university, I've just gone back for a little while, but for the last 10 years, we've had to make the first year courses simpler and simpler, and all the courses simpler and simpler every year, because the students who arrive don't have as much knowledge as they used to have, right? And so all of the courses have become simpler each year because of the effects that the educational outcomes aren't as good as they should be. And I mean, it's crazy, right? We're supposedly the lucky country. I mean, we've got everything in our favour, yet we can't educate our kids. It's just absolutely ridiculous. There are other issues as well, but getting rid of the devices would make a huge difference. We know just having a kid on a device causes stress. And then we've got all these teachers jumping up and down and saying all their kids are stressed and they can't handle them and they're misbehaving and all the rest of it. And it's like, well, you're causing stress by putting them on the freaking devices all the time. So get them off the devices. And we know you don't learn as well on the devices. We've got all these things like mathletics and reading eggs and so on. And there's zero evidence that any of those actually work and have positive impact on educational outcomes. So, yeah, it's nuts. And I don't understand why the departments won't do something about it. And I talk to them all the time. And I often get nods and agreement, and then they don't do anything. So I'm trying. But and then in your second question, yeah, you're right. I'm a surf lifesaver, a volunteer, and the number of times I've pulled kids out of the water and then said, "Where are your parents?" and they'll point to where their parents are, and their parents are sitting on the beach on their phones and haven't even noticed we've just pulled this kid out of the water. Is horrendous, right? They treat their phones as though they're more important than their kids, and a lot of them do. I mean, there's my niece, sadly, she lives in a different state, but she'll go without food so that she can get the latest iPhone. I mean, this is crazy, right? That we are so attached to these things. And it's addiction. It is addiction. There's no doubt about it, and we need to do something about it. Yeah, that's my message.
Awesome. Who else is going to jump in the question? Otherwise, I'm going to. Okay, I'm going for it. Dr. Mark, we're not really very good at actually not doing anything. Actually, we're always good at just always being on. We have to be on. We're not good at being still. And obviously, this is definitely been capitalized by tech. And I'm wondering, what are the benefits of not being on all the time?
Yeah, boredom breeds innovation, creativity, right? Being bored, actually, you come up with cool things to actually do, or you come up with innovative and creative things to do. I remember when I was a teenager, whenever we were bored, we used to pull our bikes apart and make them into different things and put big handlebars on them and all the rest of it. Or we'd make a tree house, or we'd go down the lake and do silly things down the lake. I mean, it's so important for us to have downtime so that we actually then come up with innovative and creative things. And that's how that happens. You can't be innovative and creative if you're busy all the time, because what happens is you're using you're using your working memory, which, as I said, is really limited. But innovation, creativity actually happens in the unconscious area of our brain, our long-term memory. So that is where actually all the innovative and creative stuff comes from. But you've got to have downtime to allow that to then come to your prefrontal, to come to your working memory. And so if you're always got an active working memory, it's not going to allow that stuff from your from your long-term memory to come forward into your working memory, so that you can actually realize you've had these cool things. So we're all having amazing innovative ideas. We're all Einstein, but none of us are stopping long enough to allow that to come to our working memory, and allowing that to happen. So we all need to stop so that we can actually be innovative and creative, because you can't be if your working memory is always on, and it is always on at the moment, which is really sad. But also, there's also the added problem. Sorry, I interrupted you, and I'm just going to talk about interruption. But there's also the added problem is that I watch a lot of people. I work a lot with leaders in companies, and I talk to them about how to actually communicate with people, and how to communicate better with people. And that's another big problem, because we're all busy and leaders are all busy. They go into meetings and they go into discussions and so on with a whole bunch of stuff in their working memory, or a list of things that they're going to tell people. And they'll sit down with someone, and the person will speak to them, and then they'll just speak back at the person, and they'll tell them what they need to tell them, rather than actually connecting with them first. But we've actually got to connect with people, and you connect with people by having gaps, and we don't have gaps anymore. You need periods of silence that actually tells the other person, I'm actually listening to you. So if you speak to me and then I speak straight away, like I did, just before, and I speak straight away, then as you can tell, I was actually already thinking of what I wanted to tell you, and I wasn't actually listening to what you were saying. And so when we speak, as soon as somebody else finishes speaking, we're just telling them, I'm not listening to what you're saying. I'm just going to tell you what I need to tell you so I can get the hell out of you, because I don't want to spend much time with you. Whereas we need to, once someone's finished saying something, we need to stop a minute and think about it, so that we're telling that person by that gap in the conversation that we've actually listened to them, and then we actually respond to what they've actually said. But nobody does that anymore. Everyone's talking, but no one's actually listening, and everyone's telling people what they want them to hear, but nobody's listening to what they're saying, because no one's actually giving that time to actually do it.
So good. Thank you. Yeah, it sounds like that skill of active listening, isn't it, really?
Yeah, and we've lost it, right? We've really lost it. I talk about it, and people are like, oh, yeah, I heard about that like 10 years ago. But since the devices, it's all gone out the window, right? But you need to actually listen to people and stop and let them realize that you've actually listened to them.
There's one other point I wanted to raise, which you started to allude to, and that was some of the physical impacts of this use of technology. And I know that you've mentioned before about how our neck is becoming deformed and how we're having these growths that are showing up now, which have not shown up in the history of mankind before.
Yeah, that's a funny one. So yeah, we have there's a little knob at the back of our head that we all have, which attaches to the muscle in the back of our neck, which holds our head up. And it's been found, it has actually been found in humans before, but it was found in people with sclerosis who are old. So it's usually in 80, 90-year-olds who have sclerosis. So their heads are always forward, and they have a spine that's actually twisted. And so they have an extra growth. That bone basically gets stretched and that grows out, and they have this little spine at the back. And so a bunch of researchers up on the Sunshine Coast, I think, were looking at a whole bunch of scans because they wanted to see how prevalent that was in the older population, in 80-year-olds and 90-year-olds. And then they had a control group, which were teenagers. And so they had the teenagers and they compared them to the old people. And they found the teenagers had a bigger growth in their heads than the old people. And then they actually did another study and actually realized that, yeah, teenagers and early 20 kids now are getting this spine in the back of their head, a large spine in the back of their head, because of the fact that their heads are always hunched over. And it's worse than those older people with sclerosis now, which is a worry for them, because if they end up losing their hair like me, they're going to have quite a pronounced bump on the back of their heads, which isn't going to be very attractive. But yeah, it does show that we're actually changing our physical appearance. But also, we now know that the kids, the last study showed that the kids, as I said, have 50% less bone density than they did 10 years ago. So their actual bone density is much less, which again is going to be a huge problem. There's more there's more kids having, bone fractures and so on, and going to into emergency wards because of brain fractures, because the density is not as strong as it should be. But also that's going to be a real problem later on when we start, because we all, get old. And at the moment, that isn't a huge problem, but we're really concerned that will be a problem because they've never actually got the density that they need to actually have any capacity to actually lose that later on when they're older.
Awesome. Anyone else have a question? Otherwise, I'll ask my last one before I release this incredible man. No?
Yeah, I've got one.
Go for it. Yeah, Dr. Barry.
Oh,
Barry,
Barry,
there you go.
I didn't know you were there, mate. How are you?
No, I came in a bit late.
How are you?
I guess the interesting issue here for me is that it nearly seems as if what we've got in this world with this technology now is market failure, that the market has failed. And it's interesting that China has recognised this failure and have already started putting in place some pretty strict bans on a lot of the tech use, particularly for kids, the 16 and 18-year-olds and under. They've got quite strict legislation.
Yeah.
What do you think about the Western world trying to implement some of these bans when we don't have that control? And I find a lot of parents say it'd be so good if someone would come along over the top and make a regulatory statement about the banning stuff, because they've got no hope in trying to get this technology out of these kids because they're so addicted to it.
Yeah, it's a great question, Barry. I was actually on BBC radio last week. The BBC in London in the UK did a whole series on this because there's a couple of groups that are really trying to change things over in the UK. So I was chatting on that about it, and we were talking about the changes that are happening in China. And of course, China are doing it because it's a communist country, and so they pay for all the health and well-being issues, and they don't want to have to pay for all those issues because they've actually seen what's happening. And so that's why they're making the changes they're doing, which is really good for people in China. Look, I get really frustrated. If you think about it, when TV first came out, advertisers started using subliminal advertising, as you know. I'm sure you know. And when the governments realised what they were doing, within only a couple of months, they banned that across the world, right? And they banned that because it was manipulating people's behaviour without their awareness. And they did that really quickly. They did that within a couple of months of TVs of them starting to use subliminal advertising. Now, the manipulations that these tech companies are doing now are far, far worse and have far worse ramifications than the subliminal advertising. Yeah, the governments are doing absolutely nothing. And that I find really, really frustrating. I mean, the fact that the e-safety commissioner here in Australia was a lobbyist for the tech companies in the US for 10 years, and then she worked for Microsoft for 5-6 years, and then she worked for TikTok, or what did she work for? Twitter after that, and then we hired her as the e-safety commissioner to decide what's right and wrong for us and our kids on technology. I find that absurd, right? And I find that we've just funded her even more, even though she's an insider of the tech companies. And so why don't we have someone there and running the e-safety commission who actually has experience, such as yourself, with technology and the ramifications of technology, and can actually read the research rather than being somebody who spent many years working in the tech industry. It seems like it's like hiring someone from the tobacco industry to decide what the regulations around tobacco should be. It just seems insane to me. But we could easily ban the smartphones, right? I mean, we banned cigarettes. Cigarettes used to be available to everybody, and then we realised how harmful cigarettes were, and so we might put restrictions on cigarettes. I mean, why? I don't know why we can't do that and put restrictions on these things. We put restrictions on alcohol. We put restrictions on gambling. We put restrictions on the e-cigarettes. We put restrictions supposedly on pornography, although internet pornography, there's no restrictions on internet pornography, but there is on paper pornography. Why aren't we, why aren't there huge fines for the internet pornography guys who allow teenagers onto the internet pornography? That's supposed to be 18 and above. If it's not, then why don't they get the huge fines that a hotel would get if they were caught with teenagers in a hotel? So, I think we could if we wanted to. I think the governments could if they cared about our kids and they cared about our society. I think there's too much money involved in it, and that's really sad. But I think there's no reason why we can't. It's just there's not. Yeah, for some reason.
Political capture. Political capture.
Yeah, we've got to make a change, right? But the problem is it's happened so quickly, right? We even with cigarettes and so on, cigarettes were around for a long time until they became really perversive in society, and then we realized there was problems with them, and then we started making restrictions for them. I mean, there used to be, pharmacists used to sell marijuana cigarettes for asthmatics, right? I mean, we made mistakes there, and then we fixed those and we changed things. So we should be able to change things here as well. Hopefully, hopefully I'll be out of a job in 10 years' time. Hopefully we'll, everything will change and I can retire, and that'd be awesome.
Thanks.
Thanks, Dr. Mark. That kind of answered my question. I was going to ask where you feel we're headed, and if we don't make any changes, and what changes you feel we need to be making. And it sounds like it really needs to come. I think there's litigation. There's got to be massive civil litigation cases against some of these tech companies to make some change because of the cost. The lives that are being lost.
That is actually ongoing. That's happening at the moment. I've been contacted by 2 large law firms in the US who are both doing several class actions. There's one against TikTok. There's 2 against Snapchat, and there's one going on against Instagram. In relation to that, the one on Instagram is all around body image, and a lot of girls who have ended up with anorexia nervosa and bulimia and have ended up, dying. A lot of them have died as a result of that. The Snapchat stuff is all around the sexting and sextortion and stuff, and kids who have committed suicide because of horrendous things that have happened there. So there are several huge big law firms over in the US who are getting these big group, I forget what they call them, when they have a huge group of people who are all suing the same company for the same reason. So, I mean, it's going to be, what's his space in that regard over in the US over the next 4 or 5 years. And I've heard also that there's one of the areas, it's not a state, it's smaller than that, but one area where they've gone really heavy on technology in the schools with the BYOD and everything, and there's a class action. That's it, a class action about to start there, where the parents are actually suing the school district. That's what I'm thinking. The school district over there over the devices because of the fact that these kids haven't ended up with the educational outcomes that they should have ended up with because they introduced so many devices into the schools and so on. And maybe that's something we need to do here with the schools. It's big class action over the devices.
Wow. I think I might be emailing you to see if you can share some of that stuff if you have any, because that's fascinating. And I do think that's kind of the direction it has to go. And these things, they've been given, I believe many of the companies have been giving fines before, but not really something that's like a slap on the wrist for the multi-billion-dollar companies that they are. And so to them, it's just another metric or whatever, as opposed to something that actually says, no, that's the cost of lives. This is what it's doing. It's taking lives.
Yeah.
And we're losing a generation.
Yeah, we are. It's sad. It's really, really sad.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Mark, I don't know about everyone else, but fascinating once again. I truly appreciate your time and, you know, sharing with us tonight. And, you know, I think this is where some of it starts, because we're going to be a part of a culture that looks to bring about change in our own small way as we, you know, work within our families and even ourselves as we become more aware of it, that we can share this message. So thank you so much. I want to encourage you guys. I've put Dr. Mark's website in the group chat already, and he said he has a link he'll send us later as well, which will be able to offer you a discount off his book. I hope that goes really well for you, and I'm truly grateful once again for your generous time and your wisdom that you shared with us tonight, Dr. Mark.
Thank you, Chris and Barry. Good to see you both. Yeah, we'll have to chat.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Yeah.
Definitely, and thank you all for listening and being so attentive. Hopefully you got something out of it, and yeah, hopefully it's all good.
Thank you. It's a real privilege.
Track, right? You know what you're doing now, so you can actually change things, which is awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Guys,
Thank you.
soon. Good night. See ya. Bye-bye.